Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Layman's Perspective, the show where, I'm trying out growing a beard because change once again is good for you, you peons! Today, we're going to be talking about the first episode of The Loki show. You guys, oh my shields and hammers, do we have a lot to talk about with this. Just the first episode of this show was already a larger change to the entire status quo of the MCU than the entirety of the previous two Marvel shows before it. And that's not to say that WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier weren't good, but this introduced some heavy-duty changes that we need to talk about. Got a feeling the entirety of this show is going to be a doozy. As always, this will be a spoiler review, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, I don't really know what you're doing here, go back and watch it, then come back and see what I have to say. Or you do you, it's a free country and I can't stop you from ruining this. Now let's dig into the absolute feast that is episode 1. Now, to start us off, the title of the episode itself is actually an Easter egg in and of itself, Glorious Purpose. This is actually one of the first things Loki says to Nick Fury after transporting to Earth in the first Avengers movie.
I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
And he says it, I think, a couple of times over the course of this episode. The Marvel logo flourishes a nice green and gold color palette, the Loki signature hues. Now, going into this, I was worried about whether or not I was going to have to re-explain to you guys, the audience, which version of Loki we're following here, or even what that sentence means. But the episode, in my opinion, does a very good job of avoiding multiverse confusion. They do a good job of kind of holding our hands and making sure that we know everything that's going on. We see a pretty much beat-for-beat recreation of his escape during the Endgame time heist, and I do mean beat for beat, because if you look very closely, you can even see a tiny little Ant-Man running up Tony Stark's arm trying to get into his arc reactor for when he later gives him a heart attack. The antics lead to Loki's escape, as they did the first time, and this time we see that he gets spat out in the Gobi Desert somewhere in Mongolia. Now, side note, if you guys want a more in-depth exploration of how this relates to the time shenanigans in Endgame, I highly recommend that you watch this video by New Rockstars. It's very informative. Now, anyways, the desert. Loki briefly entertains the idea of dominating these poor Mongolian farmers in front of him before the TVA Minutemen show up and apprehend him and the Tesseract. They leave a vial of reset material, which I can assume, based off of the infomercial we get later, is the method in which the TVA dissolves branch timelines that grow from the sacred timeline. I immediately noticed that once inside the kind of dreary analog corporate on steroids TVA processing center, the Tesseract lost some of its shine and luster. All the TVA workers in general seemed rather indifferent towards it, like they either didn't know what it was or didn't care. And I was puzzled by this at first, but don't worry, we're going to talk about that scene in a minute. Walking into the TVA, we get brief glimpses of other apprehended variants in the background, including what I thought hilariously was a Skrull in a tracksuit, so that was a funny addition. And then we watch Loki watch a small information dump from an infomercial led by an animated clock named Miss Minutes, which personally reminded me a little bit of the DNA strand from the Jurassic Park movie, voiced by the veteran cartoon actor Tara Strong. Now, pretty much every drop of exposition in this cartoon is very important, and I hope you guys were taking notes, because a lot of it is probably going to have future implications in, upcoming MCU movies. So we're going to dissect it bit by bit and glean the information from it.
Long ago, there was a vast multiversal war. Countless unique timelines battled each other for supremacy, nearly resulting in the total destruction of, everything.
So at one point in the history of the universe, the multiverse did in fact exist, but these universes were in conflict with each other.
But then the all-knowing timekeepers emerged, bringing peace by reorganizing the multiverse into a single timeline, the sacred timeline.
These three beings ended the chaos and through some manipulation of reality and space-time tied the multiverse together into a single unified timeline, which the TVA refers to as a sacred timeline. Now, this is kind of just glossed over as just something that happened, but if you stop to think about what that really means, these mysterious three timekeepers are on an entirely different level of god power that we have not seen in the MCU thus far, and again, we're going to get into that in a little bit.
Now, the timekeepers protect and preserve the proper flow of time for everyone and everything.
I'm interested to explore how and why they decide what is okay and what is not.
But sometimes people like you veer off the path the timekeepers created. We call those variants.
So this is essentially the entirety of what I explained back in my Loki trailer, that this is a variant of the original Loki, pretty much exactly as this infomercial explains it.
Maybe you started an uprising, or were just late for work. Whatever it was, stepping off your path created a Nexus event, which left unchecked could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
What piqued my interest, however, is that it implied that an improper resolution to a variant branch would cause the multiverse to explode into being all over again. I wonder where that might happen and who might cause it.
But don't worry, to make sure that doesn't happen, the Timekeepers created the TVA and all its incredible workers. The TVA has stepped in to fix your mistake and set time back on its predetermined path.
And here we see a super quick example of a branch being dissolved. And I mean like a blink it and you'll miss it example. Again, I think this is what they were doing with that kind of reset canister we saw as they apprehended Loki. To sum up everything, the TVA, I believe, can be summed up with this.
Oh crap, are you kidding me? 2 dots? This never needs to be more than 1 dot!
That seems to be their entire function. We then quickly jump to Agent Mobius, played by the fantastic Owen Wilson, in 16th century France, investigating a time scene. Get it? Instead of crime scene. Who am I nudging? There's nobody here. We learn that he's specifically hunting a variant who is slaughtering Minutemen, creating various branch timelines, and introducing various anachronisms into those timelines, as evident by the French girl having modern-era bubblegum. Mobius says later to Loki that who he's hunting is in fact another variant of Loki, despite the fact that the child, when asked who did this, points to this image of a demon. Can I get a Mephisto confirmed, dog? Sorry, blacked out there for a second. We then cut back to Loki in the courtroom, facing a judge. Very, very interestingly, she refers to him as Loki Laufeyson, not Loki Odin's son. This is technically the correct way to refer to him because, as you recall, he was adopted by Odin. His true parentage was Laufey, the ruler of the Frost Giants. But this is the first time I can remember in any of the movies where someone refers to him by that name. Even Loki himself identifies himself as Odin's son. So I thought that was really interesting. The judge asks him if he's guilty, and immediately he argues that the Avengers are the ones who are guilty of traveling through time. And to be honest, I found myself agreeing with him as he said it. The only reason that this variant of Loki was able to gain access to the Tesseract and cause a branch was because of what the Avengers did during their time heist. But again, we hear what the Avengers did was supposed to happen, what you did was not. Which once more implies that the Timekeepers deemed the Avengers' actions acceptable, but Loki's escape as unacceptable. And I have to wonder, again, how and why are the Timekeepers making these judgment calls as to what is and is not a timeline offense? They didn't give us an answer here, so we're gonna have to wait and see. It's at this point that I'd also like to point out that Tom Hiddleston is just doing a fantastic job channeling the cocky Shakespearean affectations of circa 2012 Loki. He does a great job of selling the fact that this is not the Loki who gained all of the deeper character development from phases 2 and 3. He's still very arrogant and one-dimensional. He tries in vain to use his powers before he's found guilty. However, Mobius intervenes, seeing a possible use case for him with the problem that he's having. He brings him to an interrogation room, but not before we get an absolutely mesmerizing shot of the TVA in its entirety, accompanied by a fantastic synth score. I mean, it just made my jaw drop, you guys, and everyone that I've talked to said that that was their favorite shot of the whole show. Mobius attempts to interrogate Loki, but at this point in the episode, Loki has kind of accepted none of the reality of his current situation. Not the fact that he's a variant, not the scope of the TVA's power, none of it. He maintains his kind of cocky, villainous facade, and doesn't really take anything Mobius says at face value. Specifically, as Mobius presses him with scenes of his actions during the first Avengers, he espouses some of his philosophy towards the freedom of choice, similar to the speech he gave in the first Avengers during the crowd of kneeling people. Mobius seems to enjoy conversing with him, though. He kind of seems amused, and he even admits to Loki that he's kind of a fan. And we see, fascinatingly, that D.B. Cooper Loki, who I had assumed from the trailers was a variant, was not a variant. The Prime Loki actually went to Earth and did all those things, and I just think that's hysterical. What got me in this scene, though, was this line.
Now you all parade about as if you're the divine arbiters of power in the universe. We are.
We are. Just the immense absoluteness and just the effortless soft tone of Mobius's voice with those two words just gave me shudders like you guys wouldn't believe. He tips the conversation back into his control by showing Loki the events of his future that he, as a variant, has yet to experience, specifically Frigga's death at the hands of the Dark Elves in Thor the Dark World. This visibly disarms Loki, giving Mobius the upper hand in the interaction, but with a simple extension of a helping hand, however, Loki regains some control, steals the Time Twister from Mobius, and begins his escape. Now, he immediately seeks out the attendee who had kind of logged the Tesseract at the beginning of the episode, coercing him under threat of death to give it back to him, because in his mind, the Tesseract is still this immensely powerful cosmic item, and that's his way out. And it's here where the episode drops its atomic bombshell, okay? He opens a drawer, and when reaching in to take the Tesseract back, sees a pile of alternate Infinity Stones strewn around like loose change, presumably taken from variant timelines. I counted them up specifically. It's 6 Reality Stones, 5 Time Stones, 2 Soul Stones, and an indeterminate number of Space/Power Stones. They look too similar in color for me to be able to tell them apart. This is insane, you guys. As Loki stares in disbelief, the clerk with the most casual indifference says some of the guys use them as paperweights. You heard that right. The 6 Infinity Stones, the most powerful cosmic items in the entirety of the franchise, the definitive crux of which the first 3 phases of the MCU are built on all the way back to Captain America in 2010, are paperweights to these guys. Paperweights! This is the moment I was talking about in the intro, okay? This is a completely meta-shifting and thus far unseen level, scope, and scale of power. And it's just the first episode. It's in this moment that it truly dawns on Loki where he is and what situation he's in. And honestly, this look on his face says it all. The look of utter awe and disbelief that honestly probably matched my face exactly in that moment. He beams back into the interrogation room and curiously probes through the TVA projector to kind of learn about his future, with some stellar emotional range from Tom Hiddleston. He weeps as he watches the death of his mother in Thor the Dark World, the death of his father in the beginning of Thor Ragnarok, and the rekindling and re-strengthening of his relationship with Thor over the course of many different movies. And it honestly broke my heart watching him watch the life that he could have lived but now can't live. And I'm happy they did this too, because this scene dispelled what was probably my largest fear going into the show. That being that a variant of Loki having not undergone all the kind of rich character development that he did in later movies would be less appealing. But this scene seems to imply that to some degree, he always was a little more layered and complex deep down, and we just didn't see it. The scene ends with Loki, to his shock and horror, watching himself die at Thanos' hand. Literally, at the beginning of Infinity War. Mobius returns to find a much calmer and humbler Loki with his head in his hands, who not only admits that he's far out of his depth dealing with the TVA, but also that he doesn't in fact enjoy killing people and hurting people, which is something that Mobius was grilling him about earlier in the interrogation. That instead his more violent actions are merely a facade constructed in order to portray control and inspire fear. This is pretty deep, coming from the character known for casting illusions. He's admitting that basically his entire persona is another grand illusion. We end on Mobius telling Loki that the reason he wants his help is because the variant that they're hunting is another alternate variant of Loki. We then cut to Oklahoma in the middle of the 19th century, where we see this alleged other Loki murdering another group of Minutemen and stealing their reset canister. This character obviously has plans involving these canisters. And then the episode ends. Jesus, you guys. Oh my god. Again, this is only the first episode. Infinity Stone paperweights? What the hell? I have so many questions. I want to know more about the Timekeepers. How long have they been here? Are they eternal? Are we ever going to meet them? Are we going to see what they look like? How did the sinister new antagonist variant of Loki branch off from the sacred timeline? Is the TVA going to have a greater ongoing role in the future of the MCU? Please, feel free to ask any questions you guys might have about this episode in the comment section below, or in general if you want to tell me about how much it blew your minds as it did mine. Until then, please, let's try and piece our heads back together and try to like this video, share it to your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you continue to enjoy the content that I produce. Remember, time is your most valuable resource, and I'm always happy you chose to spend some of it with me. I'll see you guys next week for episode 2.